Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. Congresswoman, I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
The House Judiciary Committee held a field hearing in New York City Monday on the victims of violent crimes in Manhattan. During the hearing, you said it was hypocritical that the House Judiciary Committee was there. Can you explain why you felt that way and what you meant?
Well, let me say, number one, thanks for inviting me for this important conversation. And I want to lift up the victims and the families who sat before us. Their stories, their pain is real and important. Their losses are soul crushing. So, in no way is my criticism of this field hearing any reflection on them. Uh, we in Congress must do everything we possibly can to help the survivors of violent crime, the victims of violent crime, lift up families, particularly families who have lost a loved one. As for the hearing, this was a hearing of the Judiciary Committee, and it was a field hearing in Manhattan. We had no reason to be there. We have no jurisdiction. The purpose of the hearing from the Republican side, from the chairman, was an attempt to intimidate District Attorney Bragg. District Attorney Bragg is the district attorney for the Manhattan District, and he is operating, of course, under state law. We are the federal arm of government. So we had no jurisdiction there. It was a thinly veiled attempt to try to obstruct his investigation and now indictment of the former president. So I'm sorry that those victims' voices had to be used in that way. As I said, I will take with me their hurt, their pain, their loss, and their plea for justice.
I want to break that down. Before the hearing, Congressman Jim Jordan was actually on Fox and Friends, and during that appearance, he said that he would be holding these types of field hearings throughout various cities around the country. Would you think that would be a political stunt as well, and would you participate in future hearings?
I will debate each one case by case, to be very honest. Here's part of the problem. If you really want to investigate serious crime, we don't have to leave our district. We don't have to leave Washington. Any one of us can bring information back. And of course, why I thought it was hypocritical is you notice that nowhere is there any plea to do something about the daily slaughter in America. We're going to lose more than 40,000 people to gun violence this year. No other civilized nation suffers at this extraordinary slaughter rate. The other problem with this hearing was they put forward false facts. They put forward facts of homicide being up, rape being up in Manhattan, we're talking about here. The data, the facts, and the statistics show the exact opposite, that in Manhattan, actually, violent crime is down, homicides down. So Mr. Jordan might want to take this circus on the road. I don't think it will reflect well on him. I don't think it reflects well on this majority because, as I said in the hearing, they're not seriously trying to solve the problems that America faces. We are all fearful around the issue of gun violence, and yet they didn't want to touch the issue of gun violence. So he may take it on the road. He may take it to, as they call, other Democrat cities. That's not serious. It's not a serious approach, and that's why I quoted Logan Roy from Succession.
I did catch the Succession reference there. And it sounds like, I mean, you point blank said this was an intimidation tactic against Manhattan District Attorney Bragg. And Jerry Nadler said that this is doing the bidding of Donald Trump. But I do want to point to something Chairman Jim Jordan said. He said, quote, here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are weighed down by politics, and that the DA is, quote, looking for opportunities to advance a political agenda. What's your reaction to his assessment there?
It's a false assessment, number one. And again, he is serving in a federal seat. The district attorney is a duly elected state representative. By that, I mean he has to uphold state statutes. So it's always that deflection. It's been a mastery of that, although I shouldn't use the word mastery. It's been just an overuse of deflection. We were there, we were dragged there as a political stunt, to do the bidding of a failed, twice impeached president, a very corrupt person who is now trying to use the Judiciary Committee to shield him from prosecution. We have something called the rule of law. That's why I really begged to be on judiciary when I was first elected. And I was able to serve I'm now in my third term on judiciary, to uphold the rule of law. That's not what we were doing yesterday. That was an obstruction, intimidation tactic. I don't think District Attorney Bragg was impressed.
Donald Trump has really been the backdrop of this hearing. The right has said his indictment is political. Democrats have said that this hearing is political. But in the case of the indictment, according to a CNN SRS poll that was taken after news broke of the indictment, 60% of adults agree with the decision of charges against Trump. But 76% of Americans polled believe politics played a role in the decision. Do you agree with the majority of Americans who do believe politics played some role here?
I would say it in a different way, that Mr. Trump used payoff monies to a woman with whom he had an affair in order to influence politics. In the days leading up to the presidential election, he wanted to hide his involvement with this woman to try to save his presidential bid. So you bet he played politics with that payoff. I'm heartened to hear that 60% of people want to uphold the rule of law. The president is responsible for what he does, what he certifies, what he signs to. We're all candidates for office. We know the importance of filing honest reports, financial reports, and not taking inappropriate or using funds inappropriately to support our campaigns. He must be held to account.
I do want to pivot now. Obviously, this hearing was about violence in America, Manhattan specifically. But during your remarks in the hearing, you appealed to your Republican colleagues to work with Democrats on gun legislation. What does working across the aisle on this issue look like?
Well, take a look. It's been 30 years since Congress did anything on gun violence until, I will say, 2019. And the Judiciary Committee under Chairman Nadler held our very first hearing on gun violence back in early 2019. It took until Uvalde and Buffalo, the slaughter of Black people in a supermarket in Buffalo, the slaughter of babies in Uvalde, third graders in Uvalde, for us to put together a package, the Safer Communities Act, which we passed, and not a single Republican helped. I would have thought that they would have said, yeah, we have to tackle this. This is not about taking guns away that are legally, properly owned. This is about reducing the slaughter on our streets, mass shooting after mass shooting. I would love for Jim Jordan to have said, you know what, let's scrap this hearing. We just had 2 more mass shootings over the weekend. Young people died at a Sweet 16 party. Children died. And that's just 2 examples of gun violence over the weekend. Let's scrap this hearing and figure out what will actually reduce the homicide rate, the suicide rate, the accidental shooting rate. That's what serious looks like. It is a plea. Work with us. We should not continue to live and die this way. It is only a matter of time before this violence will hit more and more of us. I don't understand how after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Las Vegas, Pulse, I can't even name them all anymore, how they couldn't say that this is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as was promised in our founding documents.
Congresswoman, I've talked to a lot of your colleagues, mostly Democratic colleagues, on this issue, and I've asked them, what do you think, what would you want to do to stop the violence? And they have all said ban assault weapons, but then they follow that up with, that's mostly a non-starter for Republicans. Do you want that ban, and would you agree that that is a non-starter for Republicans?
I hope eventually it will not be a non-starter for Republicans. We know that assault-style weapons or weapons of war have no place on our streets in civilians' hands, too often in the hands of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. The police are begging us to do something because they are now outgunned. Take a look at some of these cases. The shooter has weapons as strong as, if not stronger than, some of the police departments that are coming to the scene to try to rescue folks and stop the slaughter. So I will continue to fight for an assault weapons ban. I hope we do some massive buyback, get these millions of irresponsible guns off the street. They were never intended for civilian hands. But we could do something more basic. Universal background checks. Why won't they vote with us on that? We know that background checks keep guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. I'd liken it to, excuse me, a safety net, or you're fishing and a net. If you have a net that provides you the ability to catch that which you want to catch, in this case, prohibited purchasers from getting their hands on more weapons, why would you say, oh, it's great? 80% of the net is good. There's this gaping hole over here, but so be it. We have a gaping hole in our background check system, made wider with ghost guns and other guns, new technologies. Why in God's name wouldn't we want to have universal background checks so that only those who are legal to own guns owned guns? We have to crack down on straw purchases. I'm very heartened that we did pass the Safer Communities Act. We have the ability, we know best practices is going to be a combination of factors. But I am for an assault weapons ban. At some point, we're going to get this right. My only question is how many more people have to die before we get it right?
On Monday, you brought up that exact point, but Republicans did point to and described DA Bragg as having soft on crime policies. When he took office back in 2022, Manhattan D.A. Alvin Bragg announced his office wouldn't prosecute certain low-level crimes, and he is an advocate of a controversial bail reform, and in turn has been panned as being soft on crime. What do you think of that criticism?
Oh, I think it's an absurdity. Number one, the Judiciary Committee does not elect the DA of Manhattan. People had the chance to hear what his policies were, to hear what his understanding of the law is and how he would administer the law. Again, not the members of the Judiciary Committee. But this soft on crime nonsense, you hear that from the folks on the other side of the aisle in our committee. You heard it yesterday in their questioning or testimony. Soft on crime? How is it that they could not support universal background checks? How is it that they could not support supplemental funding to the Capitol Police following an insurrection incited by the fellow they were trying to protect? How could they not support medals to the Capitol Police officers? How is it that they couldn't vote to support extra screening materials for Border Patrol, border dollars to hire more border agents? They didn't vote for any of that. They didn't vote for the American Rescue Plan that sent important money to municipalities and their police departments. So it's simply not true, the notion of soft on crime. And if there's anybody who's soft on crime, it's all those Republicans who failed to vote to fund our police and to fund better practices.
What do you think then, in turn, is the most important way to curb violence in this country?
Fully staffed police departments with the very best of training toward de-escalation. Some of the monies that we have in the very big bills that we passed around mental health, social services, community violence interrupters. There is so much we can do on so many levels. We have to get at the number of children walking around with guns. We have to get at the illegal straw purchasing and distribution of illegal guns. That we have to work at it from a societal level, from literally the weapon level, from a mental health standpoint, and interrupt this violence. As I said, we are the greatest nation on the planet. We have to get our arms around this issue. I've had the chance to travel to different countries in Europe and Asia. They wonder, they're baffled, frankly. They're baffled that America has not done everything in our power to shut this down, to shut down the slaughter.
Congresswoman, do you think gun violence is the most pressing issue facing the country right now?
Sadly, I think we have multiple really powerfully important issues. I'll list just a couple and it will not be exhaustive. The protection of our democracy is certainly at stake. When we have people falsely using their positions to undermine institutions, which was demonstrated in this hearing, an attempt to undermine independent institutions. When we have a former president whom they continue to protect, who sought to hold on to power by way of violence by American citizens, on police officers, killing some, wounding dozens and dozens of others, and traumatizing thousands of us. So protection of our democracy, you also see the erosion of rights, whether it's women's rights or voting rights. We have a serious problem there. Gun violence is another extraordinarily serious problem. I have 4 grandchildren now. I am sickened that they have to go through active shooter drills. What are we teaching our children? Climate continues to be an incredible, important crisis. I'm so proud that we were able to pass some important legislation last year in the Inflation Reduction Act and other bills, the infrastructure bill and other bills. But we can't have that undone. We have to invest those resources to protect the planet moving forward. And the last one I'll mention for this point is the crisis of overdose, opiate overdose, drug overdose, alcohol overdose, but fentanyl poisoning. Last year, in a 12-month period, we lost 108,000 people to addiction or poisoning overdose. That's 300 people a day. We have to get our arms around that. I was just down at the RX Summit with Dr. Gupta and the administrator of DEA. This is an all hands on deck crisis, epidemic in this country. These are public health crises, the gun violence and the overdose epidemic. We have to put the resources to bear and work together to start saving lives.
Congresswoman, I hope you join me and come back to talk about all the different ways you plan to tackle all of these issues. But for now, thank you so much for this really important conversation.
Brittany, I thank you for the chance to have the conversation. I welcome the chance to come back.